Okay, so in this video what we're going to do is go over how to spawn waves of enemies inside a level. So the first thing that we're going to have to do in any level or in any area that you want to have AI is to have a nav mesh bounds volume. So make sure in the top left hand corner you just search for nav and you'll find your nav mesh bounds volume. Place that in. What you should see is a kind of green path appear once you place this in. If this doesn't appear, just press P and it should appear then. And this here is the area where the enemy AI will be able to kind of roam. So I'm just going to cover my whole level. There we go. So that's that part done. The next part is kind of setting up how to spawn enemies. Now we can do it by just dragging and dropping our enemy in. Okay. Well, that's a controller. Press and play and the enemy will work. But what if you want to do it in real time, so when you're playing the game and you walk into a certain area and then you have multiple enemies spawn? Well, I'll kind of go over the concept of how that works and then I'll show you a technique for doing waves as well. So the concept for that is pretty simple. I'll do it in level blueprints. Remember, don't use level blueprints, but I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. What we can say is on event begin play, we're going to spawn AI from class. We're going to pick our enemy AI, we're going to pick the behavior tree that we set up, and then we've got to pick a location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a target point, place that in my level. I'm just placing it above ground just so the AI won't spawn inside any geometry or anything like that. And then in my level blueprint, I'm going to make a reference to that target point just by right clicking and having it selected in my game. I'm going to create a reference to target point, pull that out, get location, so get the actor location and plug it in there. And then we could compile, save, press play, an enemy spawns in real time. So that's the basics of it. You're using this node here to kind of spawn your AI to use the behavior tree that you set up, but it just needs a location plugged in there. And what we're doing at the minute is we're using a target point in our level as our location. So we want to do that in waves though, and to do that in waves, there's a few ways that you can do it, but I think the easiest way is to use a timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and create a new blueprint class, okay, and we're going to create a actor and we'll call this spawn. And in this blueprint we're basically going to have a box collision that if the player overlaps with it, remember you want to check if it is a player because AI can overlap with this here, it's going to spawn some enemy AI in the level. So I'm going to cast to our first person character. I'm going to use that as the other actor. So if that's successful, what we're going to do is spawn AI from class. What we're also going to do is we're going to create a variable because we need to get a reference to that target point. So we're going to go target. We're going to change the variable type to a target point. So target point, get a reference to that. Make sure it's public. And then we'll pull out from that, get the actor location, plug it in. So this is pretty much the same as what we had in the level blueprint. The only difference is we have to walk into a box to activate it. It has to be our player, and we're using a public variable now to get a location for this to spawn. Remember to get the pawn class, change it to your enemy AI, and the behavior tree, set that to enemy tree or whatever behavior tree you've set up. So we'll place this in our level. I'm just going to make it bigger, and for debugging and so I can see at my level the box, I'm going to make sure hidden in game is switched off. Compile, save that, press play. So if I walk into this now, did not spawn. Oh, it didn't spawn because I set my variable here to public, but I didn't actually select which target my level I was going to use, because it could be multiple targets. So I'm going to, once I have my spawn box selected in the level, you can see that there's this public variable that I can choose a target from. So I can click on that and select a target point. Okay. And now if I press play and walk into this, the enemy will spawn. I can keep on doing that. So that's working. You probably only want to do that once though. So what we can use is the do once node. So that means that that action will ever only happen once. Or what you could do is after it spawned these enemies, just have it destroy act or something like that. But still we're only spawning one, and we want to kind of wave. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a timeline, and we'll call this wave 1 or something like that, and we're going to plug this into play, and we're not going to use the update, we're going to use something different. So if we go into our timeline, usually what you use in here are float, vector or color tracks, but there's this also an event track. And if I click on this here, and I'll just call it wave, what I can do is, like any other track, is hold down shift and add in keyframes. But you'll notice that there aren't any lines going between these keyframes, and that's because it's not making a kind of animation track. What it's doing is it's making these action events at certain times. So it doesn't matter what height you put these in, it's all about the timing of them. And this wave now, this wave node will fire off every time that there's one of these key points inside my timeline. So if I plug that into my wave, what we should find is at nearly 0 seconds an enemy is going to spawn, and then half a second later another one's going to spawn, and then at 1 second, and then 1.25, and then at 1.61, and so on and so forth. These enemies are going to spawn. So how many enemies do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 enemies should spawn now when I walk into this box at different times. There we go. And the cool thing about this is you can make multiple tracks. So you could have, maybe this wave is spawning 3 different types of enemies. You could call this one enemy 1, and then have another track and call this enemy 2, and then you can decide when these enemies are going to spawn and how many of them are going to spawn and what time they're going to spawn in the level. One of the kind of crappy things for the setup though is it's just got one spawn point, which you might not want to use. You might want to use multiple targets and randomly choose between them. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this target in here, and we're going to select the variable on the left hand side, and instead of having a reference we're going to click this array button. Okay, so you can kind of change the variable type. So this here one is just a singular reference at the minute, but we want to have multiple targets, so we're going to use an array. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull this out, we're going to get it, and we're going to pull out from the array, and this can hold like multiple different targets in it. So we're going to get a copy of one of these targets, and what it does, it indexes these references from 0 upwards to however many targets you've got in it. At the minute we've got none, but what we can do is say, oh, I want to have 7 targets. Remember, it starts from 0 down to 6. So what we want to do is then not hard code this into using just 0 all the time, because it would just use that one target that we're going to put in. We want to kind of pull out from this and type in random, and you want to use random integer in range. And we know that our target is going to run from 0 to 6, so we want to put the min as 0 and the maximum as 6. So it's going to return a random target inside this array. And then if we plug that into our actor location, every time this spawns something, it's going to choose randomly one of these targets. So in our level, we're going to have to make sure that we've got 7 of these. 5, 6, 7. And then we want to select our spawn box again, and you can see our kind of public variable now has got 7 array elements, and we can start choosing these. So save that, press play, and these should start spawning in different locations now. Cool. Okay, so to cover that spawning enemies in an area, what we're going to do is we're going to get our spawn blueprint, and we're going to add in another box, and we'll call this spawn area, and we'll call this here box spawn trigger. So what we want to do is with this spawn area, we want to get a reference to that just by dragging and dropping it in, and we want to get the box extent, okay, but we want to do it with the bounds. So if we pull that out and we type in bounds, we can get component bounds, okay, and here we've got the box extent. Now this isn't totally related to the box extent that you see here, because this here doesn't really use UE4 real world units. So what it does is it goes off by just how much of an area that it's taken in the X, Y, and Z. What we want to do though is we want to split that into its float values of X, Y, and Z, and we also want to get the location, okay, of this box. So get the word location, which we're going to use later on. We also want to just pull out from this here location and type in make, and we want to make a vector. Just allows us to split it, and it's easier to manage. What we want to do though is still use a random location inside that area. So we're going to pull off from X, and we're going to type in random floating range. We're going to do that for Y, random floating range, and we'll do that for Z. We might change the Z one later on though. So random floating range. And then what we want to do is we want to plug in the maximum for each one of these into the box extent. So the X goes into max X, the Y goes into max Y, and the Z goes into max Z. And then what we also want to do, which I should have done, is we want to pull out from this here and just plus vector, and we want to add that to our location. So whatever value this is returning, we want to add it to the location of the box. The minimum, okay, is just going to be the minus of X, so we're just going to multiply this float by -1. And we'll do that again with the Y, so multiply float by float -1. So it's just going to return the minus value of that. Float by float -1, and plug that in there. So it is getting quite messy. You could probably just combine most of this stuff into a macro. So if we compile and save that, in our level, what you'll find is we've got our spawn area. This box here is my nav mesh. I've just made it smaller. But if I have that selected in the details panel for that, you can see we've got our spawn trigger and we've got our spawn area. And it's the spawn area that we want to move and kind of resize for the area that we want. So with that selected, I'm just going to move it up, scale it down, something like that, and then I can expand it out in the Y and the X. My spawn trigger, I have just moved, okay, from there down to there. I haven't done it by the default scene route. I've actually gone in and moved the component. So whatever size this box is now, it should dictate what area or enemy I should spawn. So if I walk into the box, something was spawning. I'm just going to debug it. Oh, see the issue, I didn't plug this plus vector into location. So what was happening is it was just getting a value here of like maybe 300, and that was the location 300 that it was spawning in. It wasn't adding it on to our word location. So if we press play again, go in here, and you can see they're kind of spawning in that area. So that's how you do it in area. That might be the best way to do it. Using the random targets is another way, or using specific target points again is a nice way of doing it. So you've kind of got 3 waves of spawning enemies in a wave based format into your level now.